evening, everyone. We have had one casualty in the panel, so you all can blame Indigo. But Anirudh was almost also going to be a casualty of the Bangalore traffic, and
I also have to blame the Bangalore microbreweries for this.
so this promises, of course, to be then very, very exciting. Thank you, Anirudh. Um, but yes, we've been on a session very, very recently, and we hope to do justice by just being the two of us here. And thank you very much, everyone, for staying with us for this and looking ahead to the making and unmaking of empires. Anirudh's recent book, Lords of Earth and Sea, A History of the Chola Empire, is very, very meticulously crafted. And he writes, in global history, it is often the most fragmented regions that give rise to the grandest of politics. So I'm going to kick this off very soon. Anirudh, because when we look at histories, there's this collective imagination of, when we look at empires, there's this collective imagination of the ruler, the one who subjugates, and, there's that odd benign ruler that comes somewhere in the middle. But by and large, there's power, and that's what we look at. So I want you've spoken about in your book, and I'm going to quote it again. You write, the Cholas were as creative and imaginative as they were unexpected. So I want to first, why don't you bring that word alive for us?
Well, thank you very much, Jyotsna. Thank you for being such a great sport, considering that Sam unfortunately wasn't able to join us, and that I literally arrived here at the venue, unfortunately, only 5 minutes ago, considering Bangalore traffic. But thank you all, first of all, thank you for being such great sports, for staying here so late on a Sunday evening. It is such a pleasure, as always, to address the glorious crowd of Bengaluru. This is a city where I had my first job, my first heartbreak. So in many ways, I'll always be a Bangalorean at heart. And it is so tremendously exciting to be talking to you all, not about an empire that was based in Karnataka, but really an empire that we very often think of as purely Tamil. But for those of you who have read Lords of Earth and Sea, you would know that the Chola Empire, like many South Indian empires, had a long and consistent presence in South Karnataka as well. If you don't mind, I'm going to try and make this session a little bit interactive. So I'm going to be asking you a few questions. Please don't feel shy about raising your hands and answering questions that I ask you. How many of you all have been to Kolar? Wow. Kolar is one hour away from Bangalore, guys. So Kolar, as I talk about in my book, was a very important center of Chola power. How many of you guys living in Bangalore have been to this part of Bangalore called Begur? Begur, okay, roughly the same number of people. How many of you guys have been to Nandi Hills? Okay, a better number. Okay, so what you might all be surprised to hear is that all these sites I've named have a substantial Chola presence. Now, let me tell you why I ask you this question, right? I am a Telugu, born and raised. My family is from Visakhapatnam, coastal Andhra. I grew up in Hyderabad. Oh yes, fellow Telugus. Yes, nice to hear from you all. Nice to hear from you all. I think like many Telugus here, I really came to my own, became an adult here in Bengaluru. But I don't think this is an experience that's exclusive to us sitting here in the 21st century. For nearly 1,000 years, people from other contemporary states of India have lived and raised families and died here in Bengaluru. And to me, what is so fascinating as a Telugu who will always consider Bengaluru to be home is that Bengaluru, like so many South Indian cities, is really a crossroads of empires. Alright? And no empire perhaps exemplifies this as well as the Cholas. You might be asking yourselves why the Cholas had such a substantive presence here, and hopefully that's something we'll come to later in our discussion. But to answer your question, Jyotsna, this idea of empires, I think we have to be very clear. And since Sam wasn't able to join us, I'm going to also raise the flag of shattered lands a little bit. We have to remember that the formation of empires is very often the result of internal politics more than anything else. Very often, whether you look at the British Empire, whether you look at the Chalukya Empire, the Rashtrakuta Empire, or of course the Chola Empire, the reason why empires form is because a particular ruling class finds itself in a position to able to mobilize manpower against an imagined other, right? So this is absolutely the case for the East India Company, and this is absolutely the case also for the Chola Empire. How many of you guys have been to Tanjavur? I know a few people in the first row who have already been there, right? So in the great Brihadishwara temple, or the Perivodayar temple as it's known today in Tanjavur, if you look at the inscriptions on the foundation of the temple, the basement, you will see that a lot of the inscriptions of Rajaraja Chola actually specify that the temple was built and endowed using the fruits of conquest against the Chalukyas here in Karnataka, against the Cheras in Kerala, and against the Pandyas in southern Tamil Nadu, right? So it might seem to us that empires and empire formation is the inevitable result of a particular culture or political group growing unified in some extent. But we very often forget that unity within an in-group always requires enmity and otherness of an out-group. And this was the case for the East India Company as much as it was the case for many Indian empires.
So geography, when we speak about geography in itself, Anirudh, how different was it in the medieval past when we say consider it in terms of when we look at say the British Raj and its vast empire? How would you define geography in the medieval past, and especially when it comes to the Cholas?
Well, first of all, I'm sorry this seems to be a bit of a travel checklist, but how many of you guys have been to North Karnataka? North Karnataka, wow, South Karnataka people, come on. Well, North Karnataka, as those of you who have been there would know, is a bit of a dry inland region of the Deccan today. But about 1,000 years ago, it wasn't as dry as it is today. It was a pastoral land. It was a region where people could very much make a living from raising herds of cows and sheep and so on. And more importantly, it was really a heartland of empires. As somebody who looks a lot at medieval history, one thing that I find particularly odd is this idea that, honestly, I think it's a very modern and very contemporary idea, right? We think that the contemporary boundaries of modern Indian states conform to the boundaries of medieval Indian empires, right? So we think that because the Cholas were today their headquarters are in Tamil Nadu, so we think of them as a Tamil empire. Similarly, because the Chalukyas had their headquarters in North Karnataka, we think of them as a Karnataka empire. Same for Vijayanagara, same for the Rashtrakutas, etc., etc. But the fact is that the northern part of Karnataka is really a exchange area. It's like a intersectional zone between three great language speaking areas. So you have the Marathi area, you have the Telugu area, and you have the Kannada area, right? So it's because of the fact this is a multilingual, multi-ethnic, multicultural, and at some point even multi-religious zones, that some of the most important empires of North Karnataka have arisen there, in addition to the fact that it was rather wetter 1,000 years ago in North Karnataka than it is today, right? So that is why when we think about Indian history, we think about the Indus Valley, right? We think about the Ganga Yamuna Valley, right? So all of us are familiar with the Delhi Sultanate. All of us are familiar with the Gupta Empire. All of us are familiar with the Mughal Empire, right? How many of you guys can name more than 2 Rashtrakuta kings? That's what I thought. How many of you guys can name more than 3 Chalukya kings? Show of hands? One gentleman there. Well read, well done. But this is what I'm talking about, right? Is that because our contemporary idea of Indian history is so clearly divided along linguistic boundaries of contemporary states, we find it very difficult to imagine a medieval India that didn't conform to the contemporary boundaries of language, of nationalism, right? So the unfortunate side effect is that a lot of the empires based in Karnataka end up being split between two states. If you think about the Vijayanagara Empire, that was partially based in Andhra Pradesh, partially based in Karnataka. You have this strange argument that happens online about whether they were Telugus or whether they were Kannadigas, right? Similarly, for some of the Chola kings, there's a very interesting Chola king called Kulothunga the First. Okay, so this guy's grandmother and mother were princesses of the Eastern Chalukya dynasty based in the Krishna Godavari area, right? But his father and grandfather were Chola princes who were based, as we know, in contemporary Tamil Nadu. So one of the strangest questions I very often get on my Instagram is, was Kulothunga Chola a Telugu or a Tamil? What do you guys think? Tamil? I see some nationalists here. Eh? Do you guys agree? Was he Tamil? Was he Telugu? Kannadiga. Best answer. Best answer. But the answer that I very often suggest is that, look, here I am saying on stage, talking to all of you guys in English. Am I British as a result? No? Just as you and I are capable of inhabiting multiple kinds of identity at the same time, no matter which geography we originate from, the same also extends to the people of the medieval past, right? It's very strange to me that today medieval has come to mean something backwards and barbaric. We assume that people who lived in medieval India 1,000 years ago were somehow simpler than we are. We think that their motivations are more straightforward than ours. But the fact is that just as me speaking English doesn't make me British, Kulothunga Chola, Rajaraja Chola, speaking a particular language in a particular part of the country doesn't make them necessarily conforming to our contemporary ethno-nationalistic impulses. Medieval people, just like you and I sitting in the audience, were capable of being complex, were capable of being many things to many people. Okay? Now, I realize I've gone a little far away from Jyotsna's original question. But to come back to the question of geography, right? We have to remember that the Chola Empire was based along the coast, but more importantly, it was based along the Kaveri River Valley, right? So, very often in the long durée of Indian history, we see civilizations forming along river valleys. So, you're all familiar with the Indus Valley civilization? Indus Valley civilization, yeah? You guys are familiar with the Mauryas? Yeah? Familiar with the Guptas? With the Delhi Sultanate? Do these guys have something in common geographically? Yeah? They're river valley civilization. They're on the Ganga, Yamuna valleys, right? So, south of the Narmada river, what are the important river valleys? The Kaveri? Yeah? Krishna? Malaprabha, yes, there we go. So, the really important thing to remember as far as Deccan empires is concerned is that all these important empires of the Deccan, even though they don't conform to the contemporary political boundaries, all of these guys belong to the Krishna Godavari Valley. And the Krishna Godavari Valley is the third largest river valley in the entire Indian subcontinent after the Indus and after the Ganges. So if we're going to talk about Indus Valley civilization, if we're going to give so much attention to the civilizations of the Ganga Yamuna, we should also be giving equal attention to the Krishna Godavari River Valley civilizations just as much as we do for the Kaveri. Right? Now let's talk a little bit about the geography of the coast. Now, when you look at how many of you guys have been to Sakleshpur, damn, this is really becoming a travel questionnaire. Huh? Okay, Sakleshpur, though, I'm guessing a lot of you guys have been there, right? Sakleshpur, yeah, a lot of young Bangaloreans, yeah, great, great. So now the Western Ghats, generally speaking, they act as a little bit of a barrier to the great conveyor belt of the monsoon winds that come all the way from the coast of Africa up to the coast of India, right? So as much as many of us might be familiar with the trade that South India had with Southeast Asia, we have to remember that Africa was also historically one of South India's most important trading partners, right? But that's on the west coast. To come to the Cholas, by far their most important trading partner was Southeast Asia, and a specific part of Southeast Asia called Kedah, which is today in Malaysia, which controls the entrance to the Malacca Straits. So, from the very earliest Tamil poetry onwards, you hear of Tamils interacting and trading with this place called Kedah. And you have to remember that just as the monsoon has a particular cycle today, right? So, the monsoon comes up to the west coast around what time? June? June, yeah, May, June, yeah. So the primary force of the monsoon is borne by the Western Ghats and then continues all the way up northwards towards Arunachal Pradesh, where of course it hits Cherrapunji, the rainiest part of the earth. But then in the latter part of the year, around November, December, the monsoon winds begin to turn south. And that's when they arrive on the coast of Tamil Nadu. And historically, that was the time when the great trading fleets of the Tamil merchant corporations would take off from the coast of South India and begin to move towards Kedah, right? So there's multiple geographic factors that we need to think about when you're talking about the rise and the fall of the Chola Empire. The fact that there was a great Deccan Empire based around the Krishna Godavari Valley, the fact that you have a smaller river valley on the Kaveri, which was the historical heartland of the Cholas, and the fact that there is essentially a weather conveyor belt of sorts that is pushing trade goods from the east coast of India all the way to Southeast Asia and bringing them back.
So I'm going to go a little bit of a broader sweep here. You know, you've spoken about the Tamil and the Telugu part of the history. I'm dipping now into contemporary India from medieval past. And where we look at history now is by and large divided into North Indian history and South Indian history. Where then does regional history figure? Does it suffer?
Okay, another question for you all. Are we North Indians or are we South Indians? We're Indians. Okay, very nice answer.
Very diplomatic.
Very diplomatic, very diplomatic. Or where are we in India? Southern part of India, right? Where does Gujarat fit in? West India. Where does Odisha fit in? East. Where does Assam fit in? Northeast till east, yeah, generally speaking. So, this is what I find really puzzling about this idea that Indians are either North Indians or South Indians, right? You can still reasonably make the case that us sitting here in Bangalore, we are South Indians, but the problem with the North and South India binary is that you still have so many other Indians who are left outside of this binary. And the broader question that increasingly I've come to grapple with is that we've been talking so much about river valleys, Indus, Ganges, Yamuna, we've been talking about the Krishna, Godavari, Kaveri, but where does the Mahanadi fit in? Where does the Brahmaputra fit in? And where do the peoples who don't live next to a river fit in, right? The fact is that India or Indians, as somebody very diplomatically put it, we are not always peoples of one particular kind of ecology, right? There are many Indians who come who are descended from hunter-gatherer stock, who are descended from Adivasi stock, who are descended from various parts of the coast who have been loosely or entirely not integrated into states, right? So I think it's very important to remember that when we talk about empires like the Cholas or the Chalukyas, the Rashtrakutas, is that people who weren't in the river valleys were also a part of their history. So, coming back to my travel questionnaire, how many of you guys have been to Belur? Well done, well done. Happy to see this. Now, the Hoysalas, who was the dynasty that built Belur and Halebeedu, came from the Western Ghats, right? So, if you look at the inscripts, the earliest Hoysala kings, they call themselves Malaparol Ganda, which means the man among the hill chiefs. Right? But the Hoysalas were not the only medieval people who came from the hills and then made flourishing careers while conquering the people who lived on the lowlands, right? If you look at the fall of the Chola Empire, especially, if you look at the peoples of the Eastern Ghats, look at the Kadavas, for example, there's a whole bunch of hunter-gatherer or like Adivasi peoples who migrated down from the hills, who were drawn into the conflicts of the plains peoples, who then ended up shaping Indian history, right? So, as much as I, as a South Indian, enjoy seeing our guys represented on the global stage, it's very important for us to remember that historically, if you look at the way that we have thought about Indian history, it's always been North India is the center of the world, and everybody else, we are all side characters. Okay? Now, South India has this glorious opportunity to be the side characters in North India's story. What I try to do through a lot of my work is to, while while acknowledging the fact that yes, South India, we have co-created the idea of India as it is today, we must also remember that the rest of India also made valuable contributions to India as it is today. You guys have all heard of the goddess Radha? Radha? Yes? Yeah? Now, the goddess Radha, Krishna, very popular gods in North India today, right? Okay. How many of you guys have heard of Santoshi Ma? Santoshi Ma, yeah? A lot of shy people half raising their hands in the audience. Okay? So, Santoshi Ma is, I find her very fascinating because the first mentions of Santoshi Ma in any kind of Indian media is in Bollywood in the 1980s. Okay? So, there's this movie that comes out called Jai Santoshi Ma. And then it becomes so popular that temples are set up as Santoshi Ma, and I actually have friends who are called Santoshi because their parents don't know where Santoshi Ma actually comes from, but it's super popular. Similarly, Radha, who is today considered the consort of Krishna, especially in North India, actually originates from a 11th century text composed in Odisha called the Gita Govinda, right? So the Gita Govinda becomes so popular in the 11th century that Radha then gets picked up in the rest of North India, and eventually she becomes seen as the sole and primary consort of Krishna. In South India, that's not the case. Right? We still hear about Rukmini, Satyabhama, right? But not Radha as much, right? Well, this is why. If you were to look at this idea that we have today of Indian culture, the fact is that once you really begin to examine religion, politics, or any aspect of what we think of as Indian culture today, you will find that every part of contemporary South Asia, and very often parts of South Asia that aren't within the contemporary boundaries of the Republic of India, have played a part in making India what it is today. Of course, Sam talks about this in great detail in Shattered Lands. But that's the idea I want to leave you all with, is that it's not just about North India and South India, right? The size, just to give you a little bit of a geographical perspective on all this, you guys know how, you guys have heard of Portugal, I'm guessing, obviously. You guys know what Portugal is, yeah? You know, guys know the coastline of Kerala is as long as the coastline of Portugal, right? When you think about the history of Europe, you would never dare to leave out the history of Portugal. Because Portugal plays such an important geopolitical role in Europe becoming the way it is today. But it's so commonplace when looking for a big picture perspective of what India is. We will leave out Kerala, we will leave out Assam, we will leave out Nagaland, we will leave out Manipur, we will leave out whatever part of the country doesn't suit the big picture narrative from the river valleys. But all the geography lessons that you and I are partaking in isn't just for show. It's to encourage to really think about the many centers that Indian civilization historically has had.
Maybe next time Bangalore Literature Festival can call us and we will not discuss North and South and we will discuss everything else. So Anirudh, when we speak about, we look at empires in a certain way, in the public imagination. How much of archaeological evidence is collateral damage?
That's a very dangerous question to ask today, Jyotsna. So I'm sure a lot of you all have heard the name Kilitti. Kilitti, yeah. For those of you who aren't familiar, so Kilitti is a very important early urban settlement that's been found in southern Tamil Nadu, close to Madurai. And The glorious Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, Mr. Stalin, has declared that Kiladi is proof that urbanism in South India is older than urbanism in North India, right? And this is precisely the problem of reducing all of India's history to North India versus South India, right? History isn't a competition. History is about understanding who we all are and where we all come from. Unfortunately, compared to the rest of the world, in India, archaeology has been weaponized by politicians. So, archaeological excavations typically tend to happen when there is a political narrative that can be spun out of it. Of course, there's plenty of examples in North India. Kiladi is an unfortunate example from South India. But there have been encouraging examples in Karnataka where Banavasi, for example, and Maski in the Raichur Doab have been excavated. But the fact is that by and large, when all of us think about Indian history, we are thinking about the propaganda that kings left 1,000 years ago rather than the actual material remains of the societies, the people that lived 1,000 years ago, right? So if you look at any part of the rest of the world, like I can give you examples from Southeast Asia itself. You don't even need to talk about Europe. In Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, for example, I was talking a little earlier about this glorious port called Kedah, which was the primary trading partner of the Tamil coast. Now, excavations in Kedah have revealed to us this fascinating picture of a medieval port that wasn't a single city, but a group of different settlements that all specialized in different kinds of goods. So one particular settlement, for example, specialized in iron, one other settlement specialized and focused on the worship of the Buddha, importing ideas from the rest of the world. And unfortunately in India, because we focus so much on, oh, this king said that he was so glorious and that king was defeated by this king and whatnot, we forget that history is really about the 99%. Imagine 1,000 years from now that you have essentially Adani and Ambani fanboys going to war against each other on social media. That's essentially what we have today, where you have people arguing, were the Cholas better or were the Chalukyas better? I find this to be a profoundly reductive view of the past. Look at the conflicts of the 1% as defining how the rest of us always interacted. If we really want to understand how history worked, then all governments would be more invested in archaeology across regions, and they'll also be invested in preserving what survives. If you look at Tamil Nadu today, for example, if you look at some of the most important temple sites like Srirangam and Chidambaram, right? So some of the grandest examples of architecture in Tamil Nadu today were not built necessarily by what we would think of as medieval Tamil kings. They were built by an entirely different group of people called the Nayakas, who are Telugu speakers who migrated to Tamil Nadu in the 15th and 16th centuries, and in the 17th centuries built these spectacular 1,000-pillared mandapas covered with glorious ceiling paintings. But as much as the Tamil Nadu government has focused on the excavations of the Sangam period ruins, on trade with Rome, increasingly on the Chola period palaces, they have completely neglected preserving the 18th and 19th century murals, which are so much closer to us today and which could very easily be preserved without much investment, but simply aren't considered to be politically suitable enough. And unfortunately, Tamil Nadu is not an exception in this sense. This is the case with all Indian state governments. Generally, it seems to be that Indian state governments think that it's more politically useful to focus on an imaginary golden age than to focus on the more complex realities of recent histories that don't conform to ethno-linguistic ideas of today.
So with all this tweaking that is going on, Anirudh, tweaking also in the textbooks, what our children are reading, how challenging is it to be a historian today? Drink some more water.
I think I'm going to need something stronger than water to answer this question. I'm not going to mince words, Jyotsna. It's not easy to be somebody talking about history today. While I was researching my book on the Cholas, Lords of Earth and Sea, one of the things that I was most excited to do was this isometric cutaway of the Brihadishwara temple at Tanjavur as it may have looked like 1,000 years ago. So for those of you who aren't familiar, an isometric cutaway means a fixed perspective from a particular point of view, visually speaking. And what we did is that we tried to remove a part of the temple to show what the interior architecture and the engineering looks like, right? And on top of that, we examined a lot of the paintings and murals within the temple to try and figure out how it looked today. So, for those of you who've been to Tanjavur, you would see that it's this beautiful little edifice. Not really a little edifice; it's a beautiful giant edifice in this almost pinkish orange granite. But historically, if you look at depictions of medieval temples, it would have been plastered in yellow and would have been painted. It would have been extremely colorful, just like Gopurams are all the way up to the present, right? Now, it took me and a Chennai based architect months upon months to go through all the smallest details of the sculptures to try and reconstruct the entirety of the temple. And when I put it up on my Instagram, it did fairly well. Thank you for those of you who have amplified it. But to this day, I still get comments from angry teenagers, mostly Tamil teenagers, telling me, how dare you call it Brihadishwara temple? You should call it Peruvadayar temple. Do you guys know what Brihadishwara means? Big God, right? You guys know what Peruvadayar means? Big God. Both of these names date to the 17th century when the Nayakas and the Marathas were ruling in Tanjavur, not the Cholas, right? Yet so many young people have consumed so much. I don't want to mince words. They have consumed so much propaganda online that they are convinced that it doesn't matter who is speaking about their history. If it's not being told to them in their exact dialect, that person is their enemy. And of course, this is most fresh in my mind, but I have to be perfectly honest, Bangalore, my beloved people. Kannadigas have not loved the fact that Telugu is written about Chalukyas and Rashtrakutas either. And the unfortunate fact is that the division of South India along linguistic lines, which many of us are so proud of and that we see as a kind of resistance to whatever is happening in North India, the fact is that at some point in the last century, us South Indians have forgotten what it means to be South Indian as well. We have forgotten what multilingualism, multi-ethnicity really means. I can see some shy people trying to clap. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you. But the fact is that, yes, I think that we must and we should be proud of our heritage as South Indians, but at the same time, let's not pretend that we have some fundamental answer to Indian politics in a way the North hasn't. The political divides and trajectories we see in North India will come to us in South India as well. And what I'm trying to do with my work is to ensure that as North India begins to pay more attention to us in the South, that they don't do it on their terms but on ours. Right? Thank you all. I think that on this subject, it's worth mentioning a certain gentleman sitting in Bombay who claims that the Cholas did a surgical strike against Mahmud of Ghazni, which is one of the most absurd takes I've heard on South Indian history in a long time. But the fact is that this is not the first and it's not going to be the last attempt to claim South India and to press our histories and our cultures into North Indian political divides. So I'm really hoping that all of you sitting here in the audience will also write about South India.
But it's also unfortunate. I mean, you've mentioned it, the kind of response you get on social media, but that is the reality today, right? The propaganda is happening on social media. I mean, for somebody from the media, I see it all the time, right? Misinformation will flow. There is not a single apology. Somebody told me it's perspective. I said, no, it's not perspective. It is fake information. It's never perspective. Do you face the same? Do you think that this radicalization through our textbooks is now, because it's endangering the younger generation, that, you know, we're going to see those repercussions?
Well, I want to say that I feel like as Indians, we have this unfortunate habit of thinking that education has to begin and end in textbooks.
It's also a radicalization at homes, right? I mean, at least in the north.
No, it's also happening in South India as well, I gotta say. But I also want to say that, look, the solution, I think, really is to insist that education is not something that ends in school. Education is something that happens throughout our lifetimes. It happens through reading, it happens through authors, and through discussions like this. Soon after I moved to Bangalore in 2017, I went to Church Street and I wandered around the bookstores there. And
As you did today.
As I did today. And I asked all the proprietors of the bookstores to give me a book about the history of Karnataka. And I cannot describe to you the absolute bafflement here in one of the most metropolitan cities of all of South India, that there weren't any books, leave aside in Kannada, there weren't any English language books about the history of the Deccan, right? And I think the fact that Lords of the Deccan did as well as it did suggests and should suggest to authors and publishers, especially the publishers and editors who may be in the audience, that there is an audience here. And we want to hear our histories, and we don't just want to hear the same simplistic narratives that might be politically profitable. We want to hear rich and complex narratives that speak to our lived reality today, right? Now, I'm not going to dismiss the fact that propaganda exists. I don't think that there is a easy or short-term solution to it. I think that we're in for a long and bloody and difficult struggle in a lot of ways. The aftermath of decolonization, the politics that took off in the last years of British Empire, where ethno-nationalism proved to be profitable not just in India, not just in Pakistan, but in Burma and through all of Indochina, right? So what we are faced with in the 21st century, I think, especially as millennials and perhaps younger people in the audience as well, and of course Gen X and the middle-aged people in the audience, I think the really great challenge of the 21st century is to come up with an idea of South Asia, of the Indian Ocean, that acknowledges the traumas and the problems of the past, but presents a new and radically equitous view of what the future can be for all of us.
All right, I think that is, I was going to ask another question, but I think that is a perfect cue and a perfect note to take in some questions. I think Anirudh has asked many questions, so go give it back to him, guys.
Yeah, we'd like to hear. We'd like everyone to hear. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Anirudh. So I'm a big fan of your podcast. I'm missing you as a podcaster. Guys, if you have not heard, please hear. He has a unique style. So when are you coming back?
When am I coming back? Well, hopefully next year. Hopefully next year. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening.
Good evening.
Hey man.
So your book is on making and unmaking of empires. So I have a question on this point. It is said that often the unmaking of an empire starts when a place starts putting a lot of focus on their aesthetics, culture, music, and that's when it all starts collapsing. Is it something similar that you have seen with our South Indian empires?
Interesting question. So the first thing I'd like to say is that I think generally as Indians, given the way that our textbooks are structured, given the way that history is taught to us, we are told that the fall of the British Empire is a good thing. Yeah? You all agree? Fall of the British Empire, good thing? Was the fall of the Mughal Empire a good thing? Hey, you all become very shy all of a sudden. What is this? Was the fall of the Mughal Empire a good thing? Just tell me. Yeah? Fall of the Mughal Empire was a good thing. Great. Awesome. Was the fall of the Vijayanagara Empire a good thing? No. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Was the fall of the Chola Empire a good thing? Yes. Okay, there we go. Some interesting and differing opinions in the audience today. Well, let me suggest to you my views on the subject by giving you an example from a completely different region. So, you guys are familiar with the Indus Valley civilization. You've heard of pharaonic Egypt, the guys who built the pyramids. You guys have heard of Mesopotamia, the guys who built the ziggurats, all that crazy stuff in Babylon, all that. Maybe you guys have heard of the Trojan War. Trojan War, yeah, of course, yeah. Okay, well, this is why I love talking to Bangalore crowds. Anyway, so the Bronze Age, which is the time period to which all these empires belonged, obviously ended around 1200 BC. Okay, and for the longest time we thought that this was a dark age, right? We thought that nothing survived from this period except the works of Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey, blah blah blah. We thought that look, it's this time of absolute anarchy, and it's only a few poets who managed to really survive and shine above the anarchic masses. Over the last couple of decades, archaeological excavations have told us that we had everything completely wrong. Because surprisingly, when kings disappear, people don't have to pay taxes, which means that they can eat better, they live longer, right? So, generally speaking, and I'm speaking purely in general terms, not singling out any specific empire, I would argue that the fall of empires is a good thing. The fall of empires is a good thing because it means that regional trends, local trends are able to assert themselves, right? Now, you can see that, of course, with the fall of Vijayanagara, because very sorry to burst the bubble of the people who said that the fall of Vijayanagara was a bad thing, but Mr. Kempegowda, the founder of Bangalore, would not have been able to found this city as an independent hill fort if not for the fall of Vijayanagara, right? So, much as we might wish otherwise, our contemporary notions of being proud about some empires rising and shameful of some empires falling doesn't really conform to the archaeological evidence. The fact is that empires really are about the history of the 1%. The history of the 99% is a completely different matter, which is very difficult to discover through texts, through architecture, through art, but really has to be seen through the things that are left unsaid. So I hope that answers your question, sir. Thank you. Oh no.
That's their signal. It actually says no signal here, so it doesn't even say the watch has stopped. It says no signal, and that's where we are. Thank you everyone for joining us and for listening to Anirudh.